All right, I want to talk about Euler's theorem about Euler circuits. This is the theorem. It says a graph has an Euler circuit if and only if all vertices are even degree. Remember, Euler circuit means it is a circuit in the graph. That is, it starts and ends at the same point. And the circuit uses every edge exactly one time. It hits every edge and has no repetitions of any edges. All right, that's what Euler circuit means. And the theorem says such a thing exists. It is possible to make a circuit which uses every edge one time, if and only if all vertices have even degree. This is a very easy condition to check. So you can just look at any graph and tell immediately if all vertices have even degree. I'm just going to write up a bunch of examples. How about this? Is there an Euler circuit in this graph? Can you go across every edge one time without repeating any and end up where you started? Well, you look at the degrees of each vertex. Remember, the degree is how many edges are hitting that vertex. So right here, the degree is 2. Right here, it's 3, because I have 1, 2, 3 edges going into that point. Here it's 2 again. There's 1, 2. Here it's 3. So there are some odd, so not all are even. So there is no Euler circuit. It's not possible to start somewhere, hit every edge exactly once, and end up where you started. All right, that's all there is to it. I'm just going to throw up a bunch of simple examples. All right, here's 3 graphs. Let's just say for each one, does it have an Euler circuit or not? You got to look at the degrees. The question in your mind should be, are all the degrees even? What about this one? All the degrees. So every one of these intersections is a vertex. This has degree 2. This has degree 3. Actually, I can stop right now, right? There's one that's not even. So these are not all even. So there is no Euler circuit. Right? You don't even have to do... There's many, many 3s here, right? All the ones across the top are 3s, which are odd. All right? All you care about is, are they all even or not? How about this one here? What do you say? That's a 2. That's a 2. This is 1, 2, 3, 4. This is also 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And then this is 2. So actually, they are all even here. So this one does have, it has an Euler circuit. All right. How about this one here? Again, look at all the vertices. That's a 2. That's a 2. That's a 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. This is 1, 2, 3, 4. This is also 4. It's the same. That's a 2. Okay, so this one also does have an Euler circuit. This one has an Euler circuit. Right? Provided that you can figure out the degree of each vertex, this is very simple. You just look at all the degrees. If they're all even, it does have an Euler circuit. If not, it don't. That's all there is to it. I said these two have Euler circuits, each of them do. The theorem actually doesn't tell you what the Euler circuit is. It just says that an Euler circuit exists, right? This is what mathematicians call an existence theorem. That is to say, the theorem tells you when something exists or not, but it doesn't tell you what it actually is. So I'm just going to write that down. This is what mathematicians call an existence theorem. It tells you when an Euler circuit exists, but it doesn't say how to find it, right? Like, where can you actually show me what the Euler circuit is in here? You probably could, but actually the theorem doesn't give you any clues about that. It just says, yes, it does exist, and it's up to you to figure out where it is. So it tells when an Euler circuit exists, but not how to find it. So this is a separate issue that actually we're going to talk about next time. How do you actually find the Euler circuit? Even if you know it exists, that doesn't tell you where it is. So that's a separate issue to discuss. Actually, there are many possible Euler circuits, and you could probably find one if you wanted to. But really, there's a separate technique for finding Euler circuits. This is called an existence theorem. And existence theorems are fairly popular in mathematics. Some people don't like existence theorems. I mean, they are less popular like in the sciences, of course, or like in engineering. they use a lot of mathematics, but existence is generally not good enough. If you're an engineer, your job is to like make something, build a bridge or something. You can't just like mathematically prove that the bridge could exist. That's not your job. Your job is to actually make the bridge, right? Here, we can mathematically demonstrate that there is an Euler circuit, but that's a separate thing from saying what the Euler circuit actually is. So we're going to talk about the existence part. We're going to talk about the actual finding of the Euler circuit next time. The existence part, though, is guaranteed by the theorem, even if you don't necessarily know where it is. All right, I want to talk about why is it true? Why is it? Why is it that if all the vertices are even, then that means that an Euler circuit exists, and also the other way around. If an Euler circuit exists, that means all the vertices have to be even degree. Actually, one of those is kind of difficult to discuss, but I want to talk about one of those two things that I just said. If and only if means actually two separate things. It means if this thing is true, then this is true, and also if the second one is true, then the first one is true. I would like to, one of them I said is fairly simple to understand, so I want to talk about that one. So why is it that, let's assume that all the vertices, no, let's assume that an Euler circuit exists, and I would like to try and convince you why all the degrees must be even. So let's assume an Euler circuit exists, and we'll show that all the degrees are even. This would constitute a proof of at least half of Euler's theorem. Euler's theorem is this plus the other way around also. I don't know if you ever wondered about like why these mathematicians always got to talk about the proofs, at least in a math class. Maybe you feel like proofs are useful in general, but why you want to talk about it in a math class? Can't you just tell me what's true? Why you got to tell me the proof of everything? Well, first of all, I don't talk about the proof of everything. I hope you don't accuse me of that, because I know you're not into that. Mathematicians, though, in general, are very much into that. The purpose of doing proofs, for one thing, is to know if something is really true or not. Although, given that our relationship is the way it is, probably when I say something's true, you more or less trust me and believe me when I say that various mathematical facts are true. But another reason to do proofs of things is because the proof helps you to understand better what it is you're talking about. And this is a great example of that. Actually, once we do the proof of this, the ideas that we get while doing the proof immediately allow us to make more deductions and actually understand the problem better. I hope you'll see what I mean. But anyway, can you just do along with me here? We're going to imagine that an Euler circuit exists. Why does this mean that all the degrees have to be even? That's what I want to talk about. What we're going to do is think of this circuit, whatever it is. You can think of it as like, a little ant crawling around the graph. It is possible to start somewhere, hit every edge exactly one time, and end up back where you started. All right, so think of this circuit as visiting. Of course, it visits, the point of this circuit is that it crosses every edge, but you can also think of it as just visiting each vertex one after another. And every time it visits a vertex, of course, it arrives at that vertex along one edge, and then it has to leave again along some other edge. All right, so if we think of, a typical vertex is like this, has a bunch of edges that come out of it, and if you have an Euler circuit, I said assume that the Euler circuit exists, then that Euler circuit must cover all of these edges, right? And so I'm going to think of it, this circuit arrives along some edges. When we're thinking, just zoom in on one particular vertex. The circuit, whatever it is, maybe it first arrives this way and then has to leave again. Maybe it goes out that way. And it does some other stuff over here. And then eventually, it has to hit all these edges eventually. So maybe eventually it comes back in along this edge and then leaves again along this edge. And continues, does some more stuff. And then maybe, just because it has to hit every edge, maybe it comes in along this way and then leaves along this way. All right, so we think of the circuit as visiting each vertex. It arrives along some edges and leaves along some edges. Remember, it's my job to convince you that there's an even number of edges in this picture. Anybody feel like, do you feel at this point that the number of such edges is going to have to be even? It is going to have to be even. You're not allowed to use any edge more than once. You've got to hit every edge, and it has to arrive on some and then leave on some. I think it's got to have to arrive on the same amount that it leaves. It's not possible to like arrive 3 times but only leave 2 times, right? Because then you'd be stuck, and you're not stuck. This is a circuit. So it arrives along some edges, and it leaves along some edges, and the number of arrivals is equal to the number of leavings. And that means there's an even number of edges. These are the same number. It arrives a certain number of times, and it leaves the same number of times. And so that means if it, say, arrives 3 times, it has to also leave 3 times for a total of 6 edges that hit that vertex, right? Whatever it is, it's got to be even. It's not possible to be odd. Then it's not possible. If it were odd, you couldn't break it into half and half arriving and leaving, right? It has to be half and half. So this is why. Can I just say so? I'm out of room. I got to write my conclusion all on its own up here. So the total number of edges at each vertex is even. Shewn. This is a little word that I write sometimes at the end of a proof. I have shewn what I told you I was going to show. All right? The number of edges at each vertex must be even. That is to say, the degree of every vertex must be even. Let me say, I was only talking about imagining some vertex that occurs in the middle of the circuit. What about the initial starting point? Well, because it's a circuit, that means that the starting point is the same as the end point. You might think if wherever it starts, you're going to have one extra leaving. But actually, since it's a circuit, there's going to be that extra leaving at the very beginning will be balanced by one extra arriving at the end, which makes you stop at that vertex. So everything will work out just great. The number of edges at each vertex will still be even, both for some point in the middle of the circuit and also the starting and ending point of the circuit. They do have an extra leaving, but they also have an extra arriving, so everything works out great. All right, this is why Euler's theorem is true. And I promise you that if you understood the reasoning behind it, this would actually allow you to make new deductions. If you follow my reasoning here, we can actually say something about Euler paths. So an Euler path, here's another definition. An Euler path uses every edge exactly once. It's like an Euler circuit, but it's not a circuit. So it's like an Euler circuit. It hits every edge once, but it doesn't end and begin at the same point. It starts somewhere, blah, 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 and then ends somewhere else. So it uses every edge exactly once, but has a different starting and ending points. Has different starting and ending points. All right? This is called an Euler path. What can you say about the degrees of the vertices here? Well, the ones that are in the middle of this long path, not the start point and the end point, they must have even degree for exactly the same reason that we said before. You have to arrive and then leave again the same number of times. So the intermediate points will have even degrees. The starting point and the ending point will be odd, though, because the starting point has an extra leaving, which is never balanced by another arriving, and the end point has an extra arriving, which never corresponds to a leaving. So the theorem about Euler paths, the theorem is a graph has an Euler path. A graph has an Euler path if all degrees, actually it's if and only if, all degrees are even except 2 odds. All right, and those 2 odds must be the location of the starting point and the end point. The starting and end point of the Euler path will be at the odds. All right, how about this graph right here? My question, does it have an Euler circuit? And furthermore, does it have an Euler path? We should be able to answer both of those questions fairly easily because you know the theorems about Euler circuits and Euler paths. So both involve the degrees. So you should begin by writing down what are the degrees of all of these points. This is 2 because I see 2 edges coming into there. This one is also 2. Remember, it might look like there's only one thing that hits this vertex, but it's actually 2. It's this edge and also this edge. They're 2 separate edges. Even though it kind of makes a straight line through, it still counts as 2 separate edges. All right, this one is also 2. That's a 3 because I see 3 things there. That's a 2, that's a 2, that's a 2, that's a 3, that's a 2. All right, these are the degrees of the edges. And we can see they are not all even. Not all even. So that means no Euler circuit, right? Euler circuit requires all the degrees to be even. They are not all even, so there's no Euler circuit. Euler path requires all even except for 2 of them. And actually that is the case here. They are all even except for 2 of them, those 2 threes. So there is an Euler path. There is an Euler path. Can you see that? I have to buy some new ones. I'll get them on Amazon and endanger the delivery guy. So they're not all even, so there's no Euler circuit. There is an Euler path, and furthermore, we can say where it must go. It must start at one of these threes and end at the other one. It could start here and end here, or it could start here and end here. So there is an Euler path, and it must start and end here. Can I just like circle these? It could be either way, right? It could start at this one and end at that one, or it could start at this one and end at that one. But that's what it must look like. There is an Euler path, and it must start and end at those 2 vertices. Pretty great. These theorems are very powerful. They allow you to say kind of fancy things about the Euler circuits and paths. All you got to know about is the degrees in there. Okay, so in summary here, can I just say, if you look at the number of even degrees, if there's 0 of them, that means there is an Euler circuit. If there's 2 of them, that means there is an Euler path. And if there's more than 2, then there's nothing. So more than 2, I'll just say no Euler anything, no Euler circuit or path. All right. Something interesting that I want to discuss is there's one number that we have not discussed in this little chart here, right? If there's no vertices with even degree, then that means there's an Euler circuit. If there's 2, there's no Euler path. If there's any more than 2, there's no nothing. What about if there's only 1 vertex of even degree? That doesn't seem to be addressed in this listing here. What if there's only 1 vertex of even degree? How about this? Can you just come up with an example? Maybe I'll give you a moment. How about an example of a graph with only 1 vertex of even degree? See if you can just draw a picture of such a graph. Pause it. I'll give you a moment. See what you think. All right, did you draw a vertex of a graph? Did you draw a graph which has only 1 vertex of even degree? I gave you a moment. Did you really try? Or did you just keep your video running? I hope you tried. But this is a little April Fool. Actually, it is April Fool's Day as I am recording this. April Fool, this is not possible. It turns out there is no graph that has only 1 vertex of even degree. If you tried this, I hope you tried just a bunch of random things and nothing seemed to work, then after a while you gave up. It is a fact. There is no such thing as a graph with only one vertex of even degree. If you thought you had an example, you must have counted the degrees wrong. Actually, this is because of another big theorem that Euler proved about graphs. This is another theorem, and Euler's theorem about this is called the sum of degrees theorem. The theorem says the sum of all degrees in the graph, in any graph, doesn't matter what it is, the sum of all degrees in any graph is even. Alright, this is the theorem, and this is referred to as Euler's sum of degrees theorem. It says when you add up all the degrees in a graph, the sum is always even. For example, if I have, let's say, this graph here, the degrees are 2, 3, 2, and 3, and when I add them all up, I go 2 plus 3 plus 3 plus 2. The answer is 10, right? And 10 is even. It is a fact that any graph, no matter how weird it looks, if you add the degrees together, the sum of degrees is always even. This is a true fact, and this was also proved by Euler. This is actually easier than the other Euler theorem that we talked about. Why must it be that the sum of the degrees is always even? Check it out. The degrees count how many ends of edges are going into each vertex, right? This is degree 3. It means 3 ends of edges go into this vertex. If I were to add together all the degrees, I would be counting how many ends of edges are there in the entire graph. Just going into this one or this one, doesn't matter. Going anywhere, how many ends of edges. The sum of degrees, I'm trying to explain why this is true. The sum of degrees counts the total number of ends of edges, right? But this number must be even. That's because every edge has 2 ends. And so when you count up the total number of ends, every edge, these numbers, they come in pairs, right? Each edge has 2 ends to it. So when you add up all those numbers, there must be an even number of them, right? Like actually this number 10 here, the reason it's 10 specifically is because there are 5 edges here, and each of those edges has 2 ends on it, and so the total number of ends of edges would be 10. All right. Anyway, the sum of degrees counts the total number of ends of edges. This is even since an edge has 2 ends, right? And so when you're counting up the ends of the edges, the total number must be even. Yeah, all right. This is called Euler's sum of degrees theorem. Actually, I want to talk about an interesting real-world problem in which the sum of degrees theorem was important. This is really real, although I tried to look up the details about this, and I wasn't able to find exactly the sort of date, the year and date on which this happened. But this is an example that people like to talk about a lot concerning the sum of degrees theorem. This is an example, a real-world example about the NFL, the National Football League, which I know very little about. I know you don't know me very well, but perhaps it would not surprise you to know that I'm not a huge football fan. I got no problem with the football, but it's not something I know a lot about. Anyway, for a long time, this is not true anymore because the NFL now is bigger than it used to be. But in the past, I'll just say at some point in the past, this happened once. The NFL, so what I'm about to say is still true. The NFL had what are called 2 conferences. You know, the NFL has a bunch of teams. Those teams are divided into 2 groups. They're like 2 leagues or something. And generally speaking, the teams just play other teams in their own conference, although they often play outside of their conference. Anyway, the NFL, all the teams were grouped into these 2, they call them conferences. The NFL had 2 conferences, and it still has 2 conferences. Here's the part which is no longer true. 13 teams in each, all right? Now, I don't know how many there are. There's more than that. Okay, and at the beginning of the year, when they decide to make the schedule of who's going to play who, they have general guidelines, and the rules at this time say, I think the rules are different now because of what I'm about to explain to you. But anyway, the rules say each team plays 14 games, and 11 of these are in the conference. Like I said, usually they just play other teams in their own conference. 3 are out of conference. Okay? These were the rules. And so they made the rules, and then they sent it to, some people who set the schedule. I don't know who sets the schedule, but the league officially said, this is how we want the schedule to be, and then gave it to some people and said, all right, you guys decide exactly who's going to play what games. Each team has to play 14 games. 11 of these are in their own conference, and 3 of them are outside of their conference. I'm here to tell you, because of the sum of degrees theorem, actually this is impossible. And they had to change the rules because this arrangement is impossible, not because of anything like about these teams where they play or whatever. It's just like mathematically impossible for this to happen. And it's because of the sum of degrees theorem. What does this have to do with the sum of degrees theorem? I hope you have this written down because I got to erase it. Think about this as a graph theory problem. So we have to translate this into a graph. Let's just think about one of the conferences. They are the NFC and the AFC. At least I know that. I only know that because I looked up the details of this particular real-world scenario. Let's just look at, say, the NFC. Both conferences will have the same problem, but I just want to focus on one of them. It has 13 teams, right? And we need to play 11 games in the conference. I just want to. We're going to ignore the other conference entirely. It's not relevant for what I'm trying to say here. So in the NFC, there are 13 teams, and they need to play 11 games each with one another. I would like to consider a graph. So think of a graph. Imagine a graph. And each team is a vertex, and each edge represents a game, right? So if you have the Patriots and the Bears, are they in the same conference? I don't know, but let's say they are. I have no idea are they in the NFC. I don't care. If they play a game together, then you put an edge between them on the graph. Not all teams will have edges between them because there's 13 teams, but they're only playing 11 games. So not every team plays every other team. So some of them will have edges, some of them will not. Anyway, imagine each team is a vertex. Each game makes an edge. All right. And we can say very specifically, what is the degree of each vertex? Each vertex has, what do you think? If you have, say, one vertex, which represents the Bears, and they play a bunch of games, and each of those games makes an edge, right, in this graph. How many games? I said how many games. They play 11 games each, which means the degree of this vertex is 11. And the rules for the Bears are the same as everybody else. So the degree of every vertex, each vertex has degree 11, right? The edges represent the number of games they're playing, and they're all playing 11 games each. So then, this has something to do with the sum of degrees. What is the total sum of the degrees in this conference? There are 13 teams. Each has degree 11. And so the sum of the degrees, the total sum of degrees is, isn't it 11 times 13, right? Each one has degree 11, and there are 13 of them. So if we're going to add them up, it'd be 11 plus 11 plus 11, 13 times. That's this. But this is an odd number. I don't know what that is, but this is odd, right? Because an odd times an odd is odd. All right? This is odd. That's not allowed according to the sum of degrees theorem. We conclude that this graph cannot exist because if it did exist, it would give me an odd sum of degrees, and that's not mathematically possible. So this sum of degrees is odd. This is impossible. So this graph cannot exist. Which means that you cannot make the schedule obeying these rules. All right, these rules are simply mathematically impossible to satisfy because of the sum of degrees theorem. Take that, NFL. You cannot, if you're in the business of scheduling football games, you can't just make up whatever rules you want and expect it to all work out. Actually, only certain types of rules, if you're going to make rules of this kind, you better be careful and make sure that that's actually like mathematically possible. This one is not. Even though there's nothing on the surface which looks obviously impossible about it, it turns out it's not possible. Alright, that was the sum of degrees theorem, which is kind of a diversion from our main topic, which was the Euler circuits and Euler paths. I want to do just a couple of examples about Euler circuits and Euler paths. Here's one. I'm going to do one that's kind of simple, one that's a little more complicated. How about this? Let's say my neighborhood looks like, here is a little diagram of the streets in my neighborhood. It's a beautiful day in my neighborhood. I wish I could go out and play with my friends, but I can't because I am maintaining 6 feet. Actually, that's not a true story. The true story is I'm maintaining 6 feet. And that's perfectly fine with me because I don't ordinarily play outside with my friends. I am just fine staying inside. That's just the kind of guy I am. Anyway, let's say my neighborhood looks like this, and let's talk about Mr. Plow again. Let's say Mr. Plow wants to plow the streets. Mr. Plow, by the way, is inspired by an old Simpsons episode that I remember. Mr. Plow wants to plow the streets. He wants to drive across each street one time without ever revisiting a street. So, wants to drive each street once and not repeat any streets, because that's a waste of time, right? Is it possible on this graph? That's what I want to know. What I'm describing here really is an Euler path, or maybe an Euler circuit, all right? An Euler something or other, okay? If he wants to do this and begin and end at the same point, that would be an Euler circuit. If he wants to do this but doesn't care where he begins, maybe they begin and end at 2 different points, that would be an Euler path. So really, I'll say parenthetically here, this is the real world scenario, but parenthetically, what we're looking for is Mr. Plow wants an Euler circuit or path, right? So, is that possible in this graph? Well, if you know Euler's theorem about Euler circuits and Euler paths, you need to look at the degrees of everything. So, let's write them down as we usually do. That's a degree 2. That's a degree 3, because I got 1, 2, 3 edges. That's a 2. That's a 3. I got 1, 2, 3. Here I got 1, 2, 3 also. Here I got 4. Here I got 3. And here I got 2. All right? So, is it possible? You should be looking for evens. How many even degrees? How many odd degrees there are? I see 4 odd degrees. So actually, since there's more than 2 odds, so there is no Euler circuit or Euler path. There is no Euler circuit or path. So basically, this is not possible for Mr. Plow to do. So Mr. Plow can't do it. Of course, he can still plow the streets. It just means that he's going to have to backtrack and go across one of these streets more than once in order to hit every street. All right. What about Mr. Plow? I don't know about Mr. Plow's private life, but let's say Mr. Plow has a special friend. Let's call it, I'm going to talk about the same picture. How about Ms. Road? Ms. Road is Mr. Plow's close friend, and she builds roads. Let's say she wants to do something nice for Mr. Plow, and create a new street in this neighborhood simply for the sole purpose of making it possible for Mr. Plow to live his dream of driving each street exactly once. So Ms. Road will build a new street to enable Mr. Plow, right, to do his thing, which is drive along each street exactly one time without repeating any. The question is, where should she put the street? Where should she build the new road? Actually, there are several ways you could do this. I'll just say one. What Ms. Road has to think about is, look at this diagram here. There are 4 odds. Is it possible for her to build one new street, which makes it so that there's either no odds or only 2 odds? I'm going to add 1 edge to this graph. Now, if you think about it, when I add only 1 edge, it has 2 ends on it. So at most, it's going to change 2 of these numbers, right? It will change 2 of these numbers and cause them to be different. I would like to flip 2 of the odds to become 2 evens, because then it would be possible. Then there'd only be 2 odds left, and it would be possible for Mr. Plow to do his thing. So is it possible to add a single edge into this graph, which flips 2 of the odds and makes them even? I think it is possible. Like I said, there are several ways you could do this, but I'm going to say, let's say this one right here. If Ms. Road builds one road like that, so this will change 2 3s into 4s, right? When you do that, it increases this, which used to be a 3, it will now be a 4, and it makes this, which used to be a 3, now be a 4. So my graph now looks like that, right? And now the degrees are all even except for these 2 3s, right? The rest are even. This is 2, 4, 2, 4, 2. And now we can do an Euler path. And the Euler path must begin at one of the 3s and end at the other 3. So this is how Ms. Road can build an extra road which allows Mr. Plow to live his best life. All right, excellent. I got one more little example like this. All right, this is another sort of real-world example. This is a made-up example, but in the language, at least, of the real world. Let's imagine the mail carrier. Let's say we got a mailman who is walking on foot to deliver mail to people, and let's say I'm going to draw a bit of a more realistic looking picture here. It's still not realistic. Let's imagine, say, a city block which has kind of buildings in a grid like this. So I want 8 total buildings here. And the people, these are like, just imagine this is a city block, right? So the roads are in between the buildings, right? Here there are 3 like east-west roads and then several north-south roads. And let's say the people that I need to deliver to are these dots. So there's 2 people live on that side of that building. There's 2 people over here. There's people. All right. So the people live in this arrangement, and it is the mailman's goal to walk down these streets, but no more than he needs to. And let's say the mailman, the mail carrier, who might as well, could very well be a woman. I'm not here telling you that the mailman has to be a man. The mail carrier wants to walk on one side of the street at a time. So this street, actually, they're going to have to walk along twice, right? Once along this side to hit these 2 people on the south side of the street, and then they'll have to walk across the other side of the street. So they're actually going to have to walk this street twice. Anyway, mail carrier needs to walk one side of the street at a time. Let's say this is like in a big city and the guy can't just walk across the street wherever they want. They can cross the street at the intersections like everybody else. The mail carrier needs to walk one side of the street at a time. All right? So some of these streets, when I'm going to translate this into a graph like we usually do, some of these streets will actually be kind of like double streets because the guy has to walk that street twice. Although some of them are only single, and some of them they don't have to walk at all. Like, for example, maybe I'll try and fill this in with my blue color here. As usual, we will think of the streets as the edges in this graph. So the male person has to go along this street actually twice because there's two people on that side and two people on this side. This one also has to go twice. And the vertex will be there at the intersections. Just like in the Mr. Plow example, the streets are the edges, the vertices are the intersections between the streets. Here I have, again, a double, right? They got to go along this street twice. Whereas right here, this is only a single because there's only one side, people on one side to deliver to. Also right here, I have a double. Here I have a single, right? Because there's only people on the one side to deliver to. All right, and fill in the rest of the graph. I have vertices here and here. Here I got to do this street twice, this street twice, this street only once. And I think that's it, right? I mean, the graph doesn't really need to extend beyond there because the male person doesn't actually want to walk over there. They only need to walk along this region here. All right, and is it possible? As usual, I want to ask, can the male guy do this without walking more than is necessary along any street? You know, some of these streets they have to walk twice, but can you do it without doing any extras? I'm going to redraw this picture using only the graph because I don't care anymore about the dots, whatever. What is important is just the graph, and it looks like this. I believe it was like this. All right, we have to double these edges. Those are the streets along which the guy needs to walk 2 times back and forth, right? So can he do it? He or she do it without repeating any of these edges. You got to find the degrees. The degrees are, okay, this one is 1, 2, 3, 4 going into this dot. So this is degree 4. That's a 3. That's a 3. That's a 3. That's a 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here, and then this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there. All right. You should be fixated on the evens and the odds. First of all, they are not all even, which means the male person cannot do a walk in a circuit covering every edge and never repeating them. And furthermore, there are 4 odds, right? That means it's not even possible to do if you start somewhere and end in a different spot. So we cannot walk around this thing covering each street leg only once without doing some repetitions. This is bad news for the mail carrier. The mail carrier must do some extra walking, I guess, right? It means they're going to have to walk down one of these streets where they already went. Unfortunately. Here's another question you could ask about a problem like this. All right, we've determined that there has to be some duplication of walking in this particular scenario, but how many edges does the mail carrier have to duplicate? Like in the best case, you can't do it with no duplications. Could you do it with only one duplication of an edge? Maybe. Actually, this is something we're going to talk about in the future. It's called a little thing called minimum duplication paths, which is about if you allow some amount of duplications, how can you minimize the duplications? That's something to talk about in our future. Yeah, all right? That'll do for now.